He told me, "Gio, find someone else," then turned on adult videos right in front of me. I thought my entire relationship was over. I remember the precise moment our closeness withered into nothing. We were side by side in bed, but instead of turning toward me, he turned to his phone, again. I'm not opposed to what I'll politely call adult entertainment in theory. What pains me is watching it replace genuine connection. Every tap on his screen felt like a reminder that I'd become second place, a placeholder he could ignore until the mood struck. But when I finally really asked him, how it made me feel invisible, he simply shrugged and said, "If you let me watch my shows, I'll be with you anytime you want." My heart lurched. That was about as romantic as reading a grocery list. As time passed, my disappointment clashed with his indifference. When I questioned why he needed these videos to find me appealing, he tossed out a line that stung: "Go find someone else to be with." It was offhand, but it might as well have been a written invitation to go. Something inside me disconnected, like a thread snapping, leaving me with equal parts clarity and numbness. Soon after, I left for an entire weekend. No big announcement, just packed my things and walked out. For the first time, he seemed alarmed. Maybe it was the empty half of the bed, or the hush in the home we both share. My friend took it upon herself to jolt me out of my gloom. An evening in the city, the bustle and bright lights meant to distract me. Honestly, I'm more of a curl-up with a novel and tea person than a club hopper, but I agreed. At the bar, I met someone from her workplace, charming, quick-witted, and perfectly in tune with my slightly offbeat humor. He made me feel seen, in a way I hadn't felt for too long. I won't lie, the possibility of stepping through that open door flickered. But I held back. I'm not someone who crosses lines lightly, even when the lines at home have all but disappeared. Back at my place, I told my partner what happened. Not to be unkind, but because something in me craved honesty. I saw a change come over him, the realization, perhaps, that I might truly vanish from his life. Now he's making an effort, offering compliments, attempting to rebuild what we once shared. But I'm not sure it matters anymore, because my heart already flew elsewhere. I've pictured the future without him, and I feel lighter, as though a heavy weight is gone. So here I am, torn between the lingering sense of obligation and the undeniable relief I feel imagining life on my own. There's no fiery farewell, no slamming doors or tearful pleas, just an unraveling of who we used to be. I'm still figuring out how to let go of something that dissolved before either of us said it was over. But the quiet exit I'm mapping out feels less like running away and more like stepping toward my own peace. And honestly, I think I'm ready for it. Update 1. The moment I stepped back into the apartment, the air felt loaded, like every molecule was pushing me to say something, anything, to break the silence. He was sitting on the couch, remote in one hand and phone in the other, and for once, there was no half-smile or lazy greeting. I noticed the dishes in the sink, still unwashed from before I left for that weekend at my friend's place. Usually, I'd pester him about it or grumble under my breath while I cleaned them myself, but this time I just let out a sigh and set my bag down. It was like we were two strangers occupying the same space, neither of us sure how to start a conversation we both knew was overdue. He cleared his throat first, asked if I was feeling better. It sounded like a forced attempt at politeness, and I guess I should have appreciated that he was trying, but I couldn't overlook how contrived it felt. Instead of answering, I told him about my weekend in the most minimal terms possible. Visited a friend, got some fresh air, took time to think. I didn't mention that I'd finally felt what it was like to be treated with warmth again, that I'd met someone who actually looked at me when I spoke, who laughed at my sarcastic remarks instead of rolling his eyes. My boyfriend nodded, like he was waiting for me to finish a rehearsed line. There was a brief moment when he opened his mouth as though he wanted to say something else, but instead he looked at his phone. That old bitterness came flooding back, our core problem. In a nutshell, everything else seemed to take priority over me. So, I took a risk. I pulled my phone out too and scrolled through the messages from that new friend my bestie had introduced me to at the bar. It felt petty, but something in me wanted him to see that I also had conversations waiting. If he was going to let me drift away, maybe I should admit I already had one foot out the door. He finally muttered an apology for telling me to find someone else if I wasn't happy. Claimed he didn't mean it the way it came out, that he was stressed and lashing out. I nodded, but I was thinking back to the conversation we had about him replacing intimacy with what I'll politely call adult entertainment. I remembered how frustrated he got when I tried to talk about my emotional needs, how he offered some transactional arrangement. If I'd just let him keep doing what he wanted, then I'd get more attention. The sheer absurdity of that bargain still made me want to walk out the door. Despite everything, part of me yearned to believe he was sorry, that maybe we could reset. But then he asked, "Do you really need me to stop watching those videos?" And my heart sank. It wasn't that I wanted him to swear off anything forever, but I needed to feel like a person, not a convenience. Hearing him frame it as, "Do I really need to give this up?" just underscored the emptiness between us. He said he was trying. I could see some truth in that. He hadn't opened his laptop to watch anything obvious since I returned, and he was actually putting down his phone for longer stretches. He even asked me if I wanted to pick out a movie together, something we used to do all the time. But I felt a numbness where I used to feel excitement, like all these gestures were just a bit too late. When I tried to muster up genuine enthusiasm, it felt forced, like putting a bright sticker over a crack in the wall and hoping no one notices the foundation is crumbling. Over the next few days, I found myself reevaluating the entire relationship. I replayed all the late nights I'd spent alone while he was in the other room, headphones on, glued to his screen. How many times had I tried to initiate a real conversation, only to be brushed off with a "hold on, just one more minute," which stretched into hours? How often had I felt like I was interrupting something more important than me? My friend reached out to see if I wanted another weekend escape, but I said no. Instead, I needed to face this head-on. I told him, my partner, that is, that I couldn't keep up this limbo forever. I said it as gently as possible, not to start a fight, but because I couldn't handle more wasted days of tiptoeing around each other. He looked at me, eyes rimmed with guilt, and nodded like he finally understood. Yet still, the very next day, I caught him sneaking in glimpses of those adult videos on his phone, volume turned down to a whisper. It wasn't even about the videos themselves anymore, it was about the betrayal I felt knowing he couldn't set aside something that trivial for even a short time to mend our connection. That night, I slept in the spare bedroom, well, tried to sleep. My mind kept circling the same drain. Why was this so hard for him? Why couldn't we find a middle ground? The next morning, he seemed genuinely apologetic, said he hated feeling me slipping away. And because I'm not made of stone, I told him I appreciated the apology. But there's a stark difference between hearing "I'm sorry" and actually seeing consistent change. I found myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone, the trips we took, the silly selfies, the time we spontaneously decided to paint a mural in our living room just to cover it up 2 weeks later. The people in those pictures looked happy, wrapped up in each other's worlds. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment we diverged from that path. It seemed like a slow bleed rather than a swift cut, a series of small dismissals and missed cues that eventually ballooned into a crisis. One evening, I brought up the possibility of couples therapy. He hesitated, said it might be too expensive, that we could work through this on our own. The cynic in me interpreted that as an excuse to avoid accountability. Still, I kept pushing, because if there was even a slim chance to salvage something real here, I wanted to explore it. But as the conversation progressed, I sensed he was only half listening. His phone buzzed twice during that talk, and each time he glanced at it, as if it were a lifeline pulling him away from my words. That's when I realized I was clinging to hope alone. And hope, without effort or reciprocity, is just another form of self-deception. I confided in my friend about my decision. She said she'd support me no matter what, whether I decided to stay and try once more or if I finally walked away. She also casually mentioned that her colleague, the one who'd been texting me, had asked if I was okay. My cheeks warmed hearing that. It felt nice to know someone out there cared enough to check on me, even from a distance. I reminded myself I wasn't the kind of person who jumps from one relationship to another. If I end this, I want to do it cleanly, no emotional overlap that could bruise my conscience. A few days later, the tension finally boiled over. He and I had a heated discussion about trust, boundaries, and respect. I told him I was getting close to a breaking point. He insisted he could change, that this time he really meant it. I pointed out he'd said that before. He fell quiet, then asked if I'd considered giving him a specific timeline, like, how long should he go without watching those videos to convince me he was serious? The question stung. It was as if he wanted a free pass to do whatever until some exact date, and then he'd start trying on day 29 or 59 or whenever I said. I tried not to cry, but my voice cracked as I explained that real change doesn't come from marking your calendar, it comes from within. Afterward, I retreated to the spare bedroom again, thinking about how surreal it was to be so close to someone physically, yet feel oceans apart emotionally. That night, my phone pinged with another message. It wasn't from him, it was from the person I met that night out with my friend. He wrote something short and sweet, asked if I was doing okay. No hidden agenda, just genuine concern. I typed a polite response, my heart thumping like I was a teenager with a secret crush. Before I knew it, we were chatting about mundane things, favorite movies, weird snack cravings, random jokes about everyday life. It felt comfortable, disarmingly so, like putting on old slippers you forgot you had. I still haven't crossed any lines that would make me feel guilty, but I can't deny how nice it feels to be wanted and heard. The next morning, I looked at my boyfriend over breakfast. He was flipping through his social media feed, coffee untouched. I asked him about his day ahead, just to see if he'd meet my eyes. He gave me a quick glance, a short answer about some project he had going on, then went back to scrolling. Something about that small moment resonated with me, like a final nail in the coffin of our shared reality. If he wouldn't even try to connect with me over scrambled eggs and toast, what were we really holding on to? He left for a bit to run errands, and I started putting together a list of what I'd need if I moved out. I wrote down big things first: furniture, electronics, important documents, then smaller stuff, like my favorite mugs and the throw blanket my grandma knitted. With every item I wrote down, I felt both a pang of sadness and a wave of relief. Sad, because I was officially planning to leave behind years of memories. Relieved, because I could almost taste the freedom from constantly wondering if I mattered. That mental tug-of-war was exhausting, but at least there was forward motion. When he came back, I told him I was thinking of staying at my friend's place again for a few days to clear my head. His eyes widened, and he stumbled over his words. He kept repeating he'd do better, that he was sorry, that we could sort this out. In another life, maybe I'd have believed him. But I think trust is like a glass vase. Once dropped, you can try to piece it together, but it'll never be the same. All the cracks remain, visible or not, and you can't shake the feeling that it could shatter again at any moment. I said I wasn't leaving to punish him, just to confirm whether there was anything left here for me. He tried to hug me, which triggered a memory of how safe I used to feel in his arms. But the warmth was gone now, replaced by the awareness that he only seemed desperate when I was on the brink of leaving. It felt more like panic on his part than genuine love. So, I packed a small bag and left again. This time, I wasn't sure if I'd return. My friend, ever the gracious host, made up the spare room. She didn't pressure me for details, just reminded me I deserve someone who sees me for who I am. I thanked her, then spent the night staring at the ceiling, imagining a life where my boundaries and emotions were acknowledged without negotiation. A life where I didn't have to feel guilty for wanting basic human connection. I decided to text him the next day, letting him know I was safe and that I needed space. He responded with a stream of messages, promising me the world if I'd just come back. But I'm not that naive anymore. Real commitment doesn't materialize overnight because the other person is scared of being alone. I didn't bother replying right away. Instead, I went for a walk, breathed in some fresh air, and tried to clear my thoughts. There's a calmness that's settled over me now, like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, fully aware of the drop, yet not afraid. Maybe I'll jump, maybe I won't. But at least I recognize the power of that decision belongs to me. I'm taking a moment to figure out if I want to keep fighting for someone who makes me feel like an afterthought or break away and seek something healthier, be it with someone new or just by myself for a while. The texts from that new friend are still coming in, light and respectful. He hasn't pressed me for details, hasn't tried to weasel his way into my life. Mostly, he's sending me random memes and cute animal pictures, little mood boosters. I can't lie, it's a stark contrast to the emotional minefield that my relationship has become. I'm still not sure how the final chapter of this situation will read. All I know is I'm tired of feeling like I have to beg for reciprocity. Whether that means we salvage something out of the rubble or I walk away completely, I can't keep playing by the old rules. If he can't meet me halfway, I'll just keep walking until I find myself somewhere I can breathe again. And maybe that's the real update here. I've found the strength to see a future beyond the stale, one-sided arrangement. It's both terrifying and exhilarating, but at least it feels honest. No more hiding behind forced smiles or waiting for him to give me permission to feel important. If we're already at the edge of an ending, I might as well face it head-on, with eyes wide open and my heart set on finally feeling whole again. Update 2. It's official. I'm no longer in that relationship. After a lot of back and forth, and a ton of soul-searching, I realized I'd been holding on to something that wasn't really there anymore. The constant push-pull of him asking for another chance, then showing no real change, left me feeling drained. I couldn't live in limbo forever, so I finally told him I needed a clean break. When I went back to collect my things, he actually stood there in silence, watching me pack up. It was surreal. No epic confrontation, no dramatic tears, just two people who'd grown too distant, each suddenly confronted with the reality that this was the end. He tried to apologize again, but I'd heard it all before, and by that point, the words just kind of bounced off me. I handed over my key, and with that, it was done. Even though I left feeling numb, there was an odd sense of relief. My friend was waiting in the car. She knew I'd need moral support. We drove off, and the farther we got, the lighter I felt, like I'd finally unzipped the heavy suit of guilt and doubt I'd been wearing for months. It wasn't long before I got the usual stream of texts. I can change, this time I mean it, just tell me what you want. I've decided not to respond. I've said my piece, and any further back and forth would just drag this out. I'm giving myself space to heal without jumping into anything new, though I won't pretend I haven't thought about the guy I met through my friend. We still chat sometimes, friendly memes, random daily anecdotes, but there's no pressure or expectation. It's more like a reminder that real conversation exists and that connecting with someone shouldn't feel like pulling teeth. Looking back, I still believe people can like adult content without ruining their relationships, but once it becomes a replacement for real intimacy, and then there's no honest effort to fix that problem, what's left? We tried to salvage things, but the emotional rift was too big, and his efforts felt more like checkboxes than genuine shifts. Trust me, I understand relationships aren't perfect. But there's a big difference between imperfection and outright indifference. I'm currently at my friend's place, trying to figure out the next steps. Job's the same, routines mostly the same, but the mood is drastically different. I can breathe. I'm not constantly waiting for the next letdown or trying to guess if I'm being heard. It feels like the start of something, maybe not a new romance, but definitely a new phase in my life, one where I'm not settling for half-present conversations and half-hearted affection. I'm okay, maybe even better than okay. The tears came and went, and in their wake, I'm left with a sense of peace I haven't felt in a long time. For anyone out there dealing with a similar issue, I hope you remember your limits and stick to them. A relationship without mutual respect and genuine effort isn't really a relationship. It's more like a bad habit that's hard to break. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know I'm done pouring myself into something that keeps running dry. That's pretty much it. No grand finale, no second guessing. Just me, on my own terms, standing at the threshold of whatever comes next. And honestly, it feels right.